You don't kiss a bleeding man in a dark alley unless you have a death wish, or unless you're just too exhausted to care anymore. Sadie wasn't trying to be a hero. She saw the dull glint of a gun barrel, saw a stranger backed against brick in the pouring rain, and her tired brain simply short-circuited. She grabbed his jacket, pressed her mouth to his, and tasted copper and rain. She thought she was saving a nobody. She had no idea she'd just claimed the deadliest man in the city. The rain in this city didn't wash things clean. It just made the grime slicker. Sadie pushed open the heavy steel door at the back of the rusty anchor, flinching as the hinges let out a high-pitched scream. The alleyway smelled of rotting cardboard, stale beer, and exhaust fumes. She pulled the collar of her thrift store trench coat tight around her neck, ignoring the damp chill seeping through the worn fabric. Her feet throbbed. An 8-hour shift of slinging cheap gin to angry regulars had left her joints aching and her patience completely bankrupt. She just wanted her bed. She wanted a hot shower that would probably run out of water in 4 minutes, and she wanted to sleep. She took 3 steps into the gloom before she heard it. A wet thud. The distinct, unnatural scrape of a shoe on loose gravel. Sadie froze. The glow from the street lamp at the far end of the alley was weak, but it was enough to cast long, distorted shadows against the brick walls. 2 men stood with their backs to her. They wore dark raincoats, their postures rigid, focused entirely on the third figure slumped against the dumpsters. The man against the wall was breathing hard. Even from 20 feet away, Sadie could hear the ragged, uneven catch in his lungs. His head was down dark hair, plastered to his forehead by the rain. He was clutching his side. One of the standing men raised his right arm. The street lamp caught the metallic sheen of a suppressor attached to the barrel of a handgun. Sadie's heart hammered a sudden violent rhythm against her ribs. Logic screamed at her to step backward, to slip behind the steel door locket and call the cops. The police in this neighborhood took an hour to show up on a good day. By then, the man against the wall would be a chalk outline washing away in the gutters. She didn't know him. He was probably a junkie, or a dealer, or some low-level thug who had crossed the wrong supplier. It wasn't her problem. Life had taught Sadie repeatedly and brutally to mind her own business. But then the man lifted his head. He didn't look terrified. He looked furious. The expression was so cold, so entirely devoid of the pleading desperation she expected that it anchored her to the pavement. There was a dark stain spreading across his pale dress shirt, a stark contrast to the dirt and garbage around him. The man with the gun stepped closer, aiming at the stranger's chest. "Any last messages, Gabriel?" The gunman muttered his voice, a low scrape over the sound of the rain. Gabriel. Sadie's brain stopped working. The exhaustion, the cynical armor she wore every single day, it all snapped. Later she would blame it on sleep deprivation. She stepped out from the shadows. "Babe!" she shrieked, her voice pitched high, slurring, heavily echoing off the brick walls. "Oh my God, I've been looking everywhere for you." The 3 men snapped their attention toward her. The gunman instinctively lowered his weapon, startled by the sudden noise, his eyes wide under the brim of his hat. Sadie didn't give them time to process. She stumbled forward, putting every ounce of fake alcohol-fueled clumsiness into her stride. She aimed herself entirely at the bleeding man. "I told you to wait by the car," she whined, reaching him before the 2 attackers could decide whether to shoot a civilian. She threw her arms around Gabriel's neck. He went completely rigid. He felt like a slab of concrete beneath her hands. The smell of him hit her instantly, expensive bergamot cologne, cut sharply by the heavy metallic stench of fresh blood. "What the hell is this?" The second attacker barked, taking a step forward. Sadie didn't look at them. She closed her eyes, grabbed the lapels of Gabriel's soaked coat, and smashed her mouth against his. It wasn't a kiss. It was a collision. Her teeth clicked painfully against his. His lips were freezing, slick with rain, and blood from a cut on his cheek. She tasted the copper instantly thick and bitter on her tongue. She pressed herself flush against him, deliberately placing her body between him and the barrel of the suppressed pistol. For a terrible suspended second, he did nothing. He was a statue. Sadie's mind raced panic, finally clawing its way through her reckless adrenaline. "Play along," she begged silently. "Please just play along." Then his hand came up. A large, rough palm clamped onto the back of her neck. His fingers tangled in her damp hair, gripping her with bruising force. He didn't soften the kiss. He took control of it. He angled his head, deepening the contact with a sudden aggressive heat that sent a jolt of genuine shock straight down Sadie's spine. He wasn't just playing along. He was using her to anchor himself, leaning his heavy weight into her to keep from collapsing. "Hey, lady, back off!" the gunman yelled, but there was hesitation in his voice now. Sadie broke the kiss, gasping for air, leaning heavily against Gabriel's chest. She turned her head, fixing a sloppy, furious glare on the two men. "Do you mind we're busy? Get lost before I scream for the bouncers. They're right inside." She pointed a shaking finger at the heavy steel door she had just exited. The two attackers exchanged a tense look. A civilian witness was one thing. A hysterical, screaming bartender who could summon a dozen bouncers and draw the cops was another. A siren wailed in the distance, a few blocks over, cutting through the drumming rain. The gunman swore under his breath. He shoved his weapon into his coat pocket. "This isn't over," he sneered at Gabriel. They turned and fast-walked down the alley, disappearing into the dark street beyond. Sadie held her breath, counting to 10 in her head. The moment the shadows swallowed them, the bruising grip on her neck vanished. Gabriel's knees buckled. He went down hard, dragging Sadie with him. She scraped her knees on the wet asphalt, cursing as she scrambled to catch his shoulders. "Hey," she said, slapping his cheek lightly. Her hands came away sticky. "Hey, stay awake. You can't die here. I am not dealing with a dead body tonight." His eyes fluttered open. They were a startling, icy grey, sharp enough to cut glass even through the haze of blood loss. He looked at her, his jaw clenching, as a spasm of pain racked his body. "Who are you?" He ground out his voice, a low, gravelly rumble. "The idiot who just saved your life," Sadie panted, slipping her arm under his uninjured shoulder. "Come on. Up. We can't stay here. They might realize I was bluffing and come back." He didn't argue. That scared her more than anything. A man like this, wearing a suit that probably cost more than her yearly rent, should have argued. He should have demanded an ambulance. Instead, he gritted his teeth and used the brick wall to force himself upright, leaning heavily on Sadie. Her apartment was 3 blocks away. It felt like 3 miles. They moved through the shadows, avoiding the main street lamps. The rain hid the blood dripping from his side, washing it into the gutters before anyone could notice. By the time they reached the peeling green door of her walk-up, Sadie was drenched in sweat, her muscles screaming in protest. 2 flights, she whispered, as they entered the dimly lit stairwell that smelled of boiled cabbage and old cigarettes. Gabriel didn't speak. He just kept moving, one agonizing step at a time, his breath hissing through his teeth. When Sadie finally kicked her apartment door shut and locked the deadbolt, she let him go. He stumbled forward and collapsed onto her cheap, floral-patterned thrift store couch, groaning as his weight settled. Sadie flipped on the single overhead lamp. The harsh yellow light revealed the damage. His dark coat was ruined. Blood soaked the left side of his white shirt, clinging to his ribs. There was another cut on his shoulder, slicing clean through the expensive fabric. "Don't move," she ordered, shrugging off her wet trench coat. She ran to her tiny bathroom and pulled out a plastic tackle box from beneath the sink. She wasn't a doctor, but before the medical bills for her late mother had bankrupted her and forced her to drop out, she had been 2 years into a nursing degree. She knew how to patch a leak. She returned to the living room with the box, a bottle of rubbing alcohol, and a stack of clean towels. Gabriel was watching her. His eyes tracked her every movement with the terrifying stillness of a predator assessing a cage. He hadn't passed out. He was fighting the shock, pure willpower keeping him conscious. "I need to take your shirt off," Sadie said, her voice strictly professional. She couldn't let herself think about the fact that there was a bleeding, dangerous stranger on her couch. He didn't assist her. He just watched as she used trauma shears to cut the expensive fabric away, peeling the blood-soaked cotton from his skin. He was heavily muscled, his skin pale and scarred. An older, jagged white scar ran across his collarbone. But Sadie focused on the fresh wounds. The bullet had grazed his ribs, a deep, ugly trench of missing flesh, but it hadn't penetrated the chest cavity. The shoulder wound was a knife, slash deep and bleeding sluggishly. "You're lucky," Sadie muttered, pouring rubbing alcohol onto a towel. "The bullet was a through-and-through graze, but this is going to hurt like hell." "Do it," he said softly. She pressed the alcohol-soaked towel against his ribs. Gabriel's entire body went rigid. The cords in his neck stood out. His hands gripping the cushions of the couch so hard the seams groaned. But he didn't make a sound. Not a hiss. Not a grunt. He just stared at the ceiling, his jaw locked. Sadie worked quickly. She cleaned the wounds, threaded a curved needle with black nylon suture, and began to stitch the shoulder. Her hands shook for the first 2 passes, the reality of the situation making her fingers clumsy. But muscle memory took over. She pulled the skin taut, tying off the knots with practiced efficiency. "You're good at this," he murmured. His voice was quieter now, weaker. "I took some classes," Sadie replied, not looking up, "before life got in the way." "Why did you do it?" Sadie paused, the needle hovering over his skin. She looked up and met his grey eyes. They were intensely focused on her face, stripping away her defenses. "I don't know." She admitted the truth, slipping out before she could stop it. "I was tired. I saw them corner you. It pissed me off." A faint, humorless shadow of a smile touched his lips. "It pissed you off?" "Yeah. Now hold still, I have 3 more stitches." When she finished, she taped thick gauze pads over the wounds and handed him 2 generic ibuprofen and a glass of tap water. "It's all I have for the pain. You need real antibiotics tomorrow. If that gets infected, you'll go septic." He swallowed the pills without water. He looked around the tiny, cramped apartment. At the peeling wallpaper, the stack of past-due bills on the tiny kitchen table, the broken radiator. He took in every detail, filing it away. Then his gaze returned to her. "What is your name?" "Sadie." "Sadie," he repeated. The way he said it made it sound like a threat and a promise all at once. "I won't forget this. Just don't bleed on the upholstery." She sighed, too exhausted to deal with cryptic macho gratitude. "The couch is the nicest thing I own." She threw a thin blanket over him and retreated to the armchair in the corner, curling her knees to her chest. She intended to stay awake. She intended to keep an eye on the dangerous man in her living room, but the exhaustion won. Her eyes fell shut, and the sound of the rain lulled her into a heavy, dreamless sleep. When Sadie woke up, the apartment was freezing, and the morning light was grey and unforgiving. She jerked upright, panic spiking in her chest. She looked at the couch. It was empty. The blanket was folded neatly on one end. Sadie let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. She stood up, her joints popping, and walked over to the coffee table. Sitting next to her plastic first aid box was a thick, heavy stack of $100 bills. It had to be at least $10,000. There was no note, just the money, and on the very top bill, a single dried, rust-colored fingerprint. 3 weeks passed. The bruise on Sadie's neck faded from dark purple to sickly yellow, and then disappeared entirely. The memory of the freezing, coppery kiss in the alley began to feel like a bizarre fever dream. The money was real, though. She had hidden it inside a hollowed-out textbook under her bed. $10,000. It was enough to pay off her mother's lingering medical debts, fix her car, and maybe even take a month off from the bar to sleep. She hadn't spent a dime of it. Every time she looked at the stack, she felt a cold pit in her stomach. Blood money always came with a price, and on a damp Tuesday evening, the price came knocking. Sadie was in the middle of wiping down the sticky bar counter when the front door banged open. Her older brother Dean stumbled in. He looked like hell. His lip was split, his left eye was swollen shut, and he was trembling so violently his hands looked like hummingbirds. Sadie, he gasped, grabbing the edge of the bar. Sadie, you gotta help me. She dropped the rag, her heart sinking. Dean was a chronic screw-up. He gambled, he drank, and he always looked for the easy way out. But she had never seen him look this terrified. "What did you do?" she demanded, grabbing his wrist and pulling him toward the back room. I messed up. I messed up bad, Sades. Dean collapsed onto a crate of cheap vodka, burying his face in his hands. I borrowed money, a year ago. I thought I had a sure thing on a fight, but it went south. The interest. It kept piling up. Borrowed from who? Dean... Sadie's voice was dangerously quiet. Dean looked up, his one good eye wide with panic. Jimmy, the snake Corelli. He runs the books for the syndicate. Sadie felt the blood drain from her face. The syndicate wasn't a street gang. They were the apex predators of the city. They owned the judges, the police chiefs, and the high-end real estate. "How much?" she whispered. 50 grand. Dean choked out. "They gave me until midnight tonight. If I don't have it, they said they're going to start taking pieces of me. Sadie, please. I know you have some savings." 50 grand, Sadie shouted, slapping the wall. "Are you insane? Where am I supposed to get $50,000? She thought of the textbook under her bed. 10,000. It wasn't even close, but it was a down payment. It was something to negotiate with. "Stay here," she ordered, pointing a trembling finger at him. "Lock the door. Don't answer it for anyone but me." An hour later, Sadie stood on the pavement outside the Obsidian. It was a private members-only club in the financial district. The building was an imposing monolith of black glass and steel. Valets in crisp uniforms rushed to park Ferraris and Aston Martins. Sadie felt entirely absurd standing there in her worn boots and faded leather jacket, clutching a canvas tote bag that contained $10,000 in cash. She walked up to the two massive bouncers flanking the velvet rope. They looked like mountains stuffed into tailored suits. "Private event," one of them rumbled, crossing his arms. "I need to see Jimmy Corelli," Sadie said, keeping her chin high to mask the violent shaking of her knees. "I have a payment for him, from Dean Hayes." The bouncer raised an eyebrow, looking her up and down with blatant amusement. "Jimmy doesn't take walk-ins, sweetheart. Put it in an envelope and mail it. If I don't give it to him tonight, my brother is dead," Sadie said, her voice turning sharp. "Tell him I have 10 grand in cash right here, right now. As a show of good faith, tell him I want to negotiate the rest." The bouncer chuckled. "Negotiate with the syndicate lady, you watch too many movies." He reached out to shove her away. "Wait." A third man stepped out from the heavy glass doors of the club. He was older, wearing a silver silk tie, his silver hair slicked back. He had the cold, dead eyes of a shark. He looked at Sadie, then at the canvas bag she was clutching to her chest. "Dean Hayes' sister?" the man asked. Sadie swallowed hard. "Yes." The older man studied her for a long moment. "I'm Marcus. I handle Jimmy's accounts when Jimmy is indisposed. The boss wants to clear the books tonight. You want to negotiate? You can negotiate with him." He jerked his head toward the door. The bouncers stepped aside. Sadie walked into the lion's den. The Obsidian was suffocatingly luxurious. The air smelled of expensive cigars, vanilla, and dark liquor. Heavy crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over plush velvet booths. Jazz played softly from a live band in the corner. Everyone in the room looked wealthy, powerful, and utterly ruthless. Marcus led her to a private elevator in the back, swiping a black keycard to activate it. They rode up in silence. Sadie's stomach twisted into tighter and tighter knots. She was going to see the boss, the head of the syndicate, the man who ordered hits with his morning coffee. The elevator doors chimed and slid open. They stepped into a sprawling penthouse office. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city skyline, the rain lashing against the glass. The room was decorated in dark woods and leather. At the far end of the room, behind a massive mahogany desk, sat a man. His back was to them, looking out at the city. He wore a charcoal suit tailored so perfectly it looked like armor. The smoke from a glass of amber liquid curled into the air from the desk. "Boss," Marcus said softly. "The Hayes girl. She brought a down payment for her brother's debt. Wants to negotiate terms." The chair slowly swiveled around. Sadie stopped breathing. Her hands went numb, the canvas bag slipping slightly in her grip. It was him, the man from the alley. He didn't look battered or desperate anymore. There was no blood, no rain plastering his hair. He looked immaculate, powerful, and terrifyingly calm. His icy grey eyes locked onto Sadie, cutting across the distance of the room. For a second, there was no reaction. Then Gabriel Rossi leaned back in his leather chair, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across his face. "Leave us, Marcus," Gabriel said. His voice was smooth now, lacking the gravel of pain from 3 weeks ago, but the authority in it was absolute. Marcus bowed his head slightly and stepped back into the elevator. The doors slid shut with a soft ding. They were alone. Gabriel picked up his glass of whiskey, swirling the amber liquid. He didn't break eye contact. "Sadie," he said, tasting her name on his tongue. "I told you I wouldn't forget." Sadie stood frozen, the canvas bag heavy in her hands. The room suddenly felt entirely devoid of oxygen. She hadn't kissed a low-level thug. She hadn't saved a nobody. She had saved the devil himself. And now he owned her brother's life. The heavy mahogany door clicked shut, sealing them in. The silence in the penthouse was absolute, broken only by the muffled rhythmic drumming of rain against the reinforced glass. Sadie didn't drop the canvas bag. She held it tighter, her knuckles turning white as a cold, paralyzing realization washed over her. Gabriel Rossi set his whiskey glass on the desk. The ice clinked sharply. He stood up, moving with a fluid grace that belied the fresh stitches pulling at his shoulder. He wore a dark, tailored suit that hid the bandages, but Sadie knew exactly what lay beneath the crisp white cotton of his shirt. She had sewn his skin together. He walked around the desk, his footsteps silent on the thick Persian rug. He stopped 3 feet away from her, close enough that she could smell the bergamot cologne, cutting sharply through the scent of expensive bourbon. "Dean Hayes," Gabriel said, his voice a quiet, dangerous murmur. He tilted his head, studying her face with those predatory ice-water eyes. The degenerate gambler who lost $50,000 he didn't have. "He's your brother." Sadie forced herself to breathe. Panic was a luxury she couldn't afford. Not here. Not with him. "He's an idiot," she said, her voice shaking only slightly. "But he's my brother. I brought $10,000 as a down payment." She thrust the canvas bag forward. It was a pathetic shield, but it was all she had. Gabriel didn't take the bag. He reached out and unzipped it, his long fingers pushing aside the rough canvas to reveal the thick stacks of $100 bills inside. He stared at the money for a long moment. Then a low, humorless laugh rumbled in his chest. He reached in and pulled out the top bill. He held it up to the dim light. In the center, barely visible, was a faded, rust-colored smudge. His own dried blood. "You brought me my own money," Gabriel said softly. "It's all I have." Sadie shot back the exhaustion, finally overriding her terror. "I haven't slept in 3 days. My brother is a dead man, walking, and I just found out the junkie I saved in an alley runs the city. So yes, I brought you your own money. Take it. Give me time to get the rest." Gabriel lowered the bill. The amusement vanished from his face, replaced by a cold, calculating intensity. He stepped closer. Sadie held her ground, refusing to step back, even as his sheer physical presence threatened to suffocate her. Jimmy Corelli was going to gut him tonight. Gabriel stating a fact, not a threat. That was the order. You borrow from the syndicate you pay, or we make an example of you. It's bad business to let a debt slide. "I saved your life," Sadie whispered, the words tearing out of her throat. She hated playing that card. It felt cheap, desperate. But Dean's face, bruised and terrified, flashed in her mind. Gabriel's eyes locked onto hers. The air between them crackled heavy with the memory of rain copper and a violent bruising kiss. "You did," he agreed. He reached out his thumb, gently tracing the line of her jaw. His touch was warm, a jarring contrast to the coldness of his gaze. Sadie flinched, but she didn't pull away. 3 weeks ago, someone sold me out. Gabriel continued, his thumb dropping away. He turned his back to her, looking out the window at the sprawling, rain-slicked city. Only 3 men knew my route that night. One of them is a traitor. I've spent 3 weeks bleeding, watching my own inner circle, waiting for the rat to flinch. I can't trust my lieutenants. I can't trust the men guarding my door. He turned back to face her. But I know I can trust the cynical bartender who stepped in front of a loaded gun for a total stranger. Sadie swallowed hard. What are you saying? I'm saying the 50,000 is forgiven. Gabriel walked back to his desk, picking up a pen and writing something on a heavy piece of cardstock. Consider the debt paid. Relief, sharp and overwhelming, buckled Sadie's knees. She swayed slightly, catching herself on the back of a leather armchair. Thank you. I'll make sure Dean never steps foot in your casinos again. Dean is irrelevant. Gabriel cut in, his voice hardening. He slid the cardstock across the polished wood of the desk. You don't get something for nothing in my world, Sadie. The debt is forgiven, but you belong to me now. Sadie's head snapped up. Excuse me, I need someone on the outside. Gabriel said, his tone entirely businesslike. Someone who isn't connected to the families. Someone invisible. You're going to be my eyes and ears. I own a restaurant down in the marina. The Silver Spoon. You start tomorrow as the new floor manager. I pour cheap gin for a living. Sadie argued, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm. I don't know how to run a high-end restaurant. You don't have to, Gabriel replied, leaning over the desk. You just have to watch the people who eat there. My captains meet in the private dining rooms every Tuesday and Friday. You watch who they talk to. You watch who looks nervous. You report directly to me. And if I say no, Gabriel's eyes went dead. Then Jimmy Corelli pays your brother a visit at midnight. It wasn't a choice. It was a velvet trap, and the jaws had just snapped shut around her ankle. Sadie stared at the man standing before her. He wasn't a victim anymore. He was a predator, ruthlessly using her one vulnerability to chain her to his side. She walked over to the desk, grabbed the cardstock with the restaurant's address, and shoved it into her pocket. She left the canvas bag of money on the floor. What time do I start? She asked, her voice entirely flat. Gabriel smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. 5 o'clock. Don't be late. The Silver Spoon was a masterclass in aggressive wealth. The floors were imported Italian marble. The lighting was a soft, ambient glow that made everyone look 10 years younger, and a single steak cost more than Sadie's weekly grocery budget. For the first 2 weeks, she felt like a stray dog locked inside a jewelry store. Her job as floor manager was largely a fiction. The actual staff ran the place with military precision. Sadie's real job was exactly what Gabriel had ordered: observation. She wore a sleek, black pencil skirt and a silk blouse that one of Gabriel's fixers had dropped off at her apartment, clothing that cost more than her car. She stood near the mahogany hostess stand, holding a tablet she barely looked at, watching the room. It didn't take long to realize that the Silver Spoon was just a boardroom with better food. Politicians dined with contractors. Judges drank scotch with union bosses, and twice a week Gabriel's captains took over the private VIP rooms in the back. Sadie learned their faces quickly. There was Victor, a broad-shouldered man with a brutal flattened nose who ran the docks. There was Leo Sharp and Twitchy, who handled the narcotics trafficking. And then there was Frank, a quiet older man who managed the syndicate's legitimate real estate fronts. They ignored her. To them, she was just another piece of scenery. A pretty face paid to keep the civilians away from the back doors. They had no idea she was watching every handshake, noting every hushed argument in the hallways, and reporting it all back to the man they served. She saw Gabriel rarely, and only ever in passing. He would arrive late, flanked by guards, a ghost moving through his own kingdom. Every time he walked into the room, the temperature seemed to drop. Conversations hushed. Men sat up straighter, but occasionally across the crowded dining room, his grey eyes would find hers. A silent question. Anything she would give a subtle shake of her head, and he would move on. It was exhausting. Sadie was living a double life. By day, she checked on Dean, making sure he was staying sober and out of the underground poker rooms. By night, she wore silk and served as a spy for a crime lord. The anxiety gnawed at her stomach, a constant dull ache. On a rainy Thursday night, the fragile routine shattered. The restaurant was nearing closing time. The main floor was empty chairs stacked on tables, the busboys mopping the marble. The only people left were in VIP Room B. Victor and 3 of his enforcers. Sadie was by the bar, tallying the night's receipts, when the door to Room B slammed open. One of Victor's men stumbled out. He was clutching his forearm, his face a sickening shade of grey. Dark, heavy blood dripped rapidly onto the pristine marble floor, pooling around his expensive leather shoes. "Get a doctor," Victor barked, stepping out behind him. The big man was holding a bloody steak knife. His chest heaved. "Now!" The bartender froze, dropping a glass. It shattered loudly in the quiet room. Sadie didn't think. The adrenaline hit her bloodstream, overriding her fear. She dropped her pen and moved fast, closing the distance between the bar and the hallway in seconds. "Bring him to the kitchen." Sadie ordered her voice, cutting through the panic with sharp authority. She grabbed the bleeding man's uninjured arm. "Walk. Keep your arm elevated above your heart." Victor glared at her, his eyes wild. "Who the hell are you?" "I'm the one who's going to stop him from bleeding to death on your shoes," Sadie snapped back. "Kitchen. Move." She dragged the enforcer through the swinging stainless steel doors. The kitchen staff had already gone home for the night. The room smelled of bleach and cold grease. Sadie shoved the man into a metal chair and grabbed a clean linen napkin from a prep station. "Hold this," she instructed, pressing the heavy cloth violently against the deep gash on his forearm. The man hissed, bucking against her. "Hold it tight unless you want to lose the arm." She started tearing through the kitchen's first aid kit on the wall. It was meant for minor burns and cuts, not trauma, but it had gauze medical tape and a bottle of iodine. Victor pushed through the doors, watching her work with narrowed eyes. He mouthed off. I had to correct him. Sadie ignored the casual admission of violence. She peeled the bloody napkin back. The cut was deep, slicing through the muscle, but it had missed the major artery. It was ugly, but not fatal. She poured the iodine directly into the wound. The enforcer screamed, a ragged, wet sound. "Shut up!" Victor growled, slapping the back of the man's head. Sadie worked mechanically. Pack the wound. Wrap the gauze tightly to create pressure. Secure it with tape. Her hands were steady, entirely detached from the reality of the situation. This was just a problem to solve. When she finished, she stood up, wiping her bloody hands on another napkin. She looked at Victor. "He needs real stitches," she said coldly. "Take him to one of your underground docks, and tell your boys to clean the blood off the marble before the morning shift gets here." Victor stared at her. The anger in his eyes slowly faded, replaced by a begrudging, heavy respect. He looked at her blood-stained silk blouse, then at her steady hands. "You got a spine, sweetheart," Victor rumbled. He jerked his head at the wounded man. "Come on, get up." They left the kitchen. Sadie stood alone, in the harsh, fluorescent light. The adrenaline evaporated, leaving her hollow and shaking. She leaned over the stainless steel sink and gripped the edges, squeezing her eyes shut, as a wave of nausea washed over her. "You're making a habit of this," Sadie gasped, spinning around. Gabriel was standing in the doorway. He wore a long, dark overcoat, the collar turned up against the rain outside. He looked at the bloody medical supplies scattered on the prep table, and then at Sadie. "Victor called me," Gabriel said, stepping into the kitchen. His voice was quiet, echoing slightly off the metal walls. "Said the new floor manager just patched up one of his boys without batting an eye. He was bleeding on the floor." Sadie managed her voice, trembling. "It ruins the aesthetic." Gabriel didn't smile. He walked toward her, his heavy footsteps deliberate. He stopped right in front of her, reaching out. Sadie froze, expecting violence. Instead, his thumb brushed against her cheek, wiping away a smear of blood she hadn't known was there. His touch burned against her cold skin. "You hate this," he murmured, looking down at her. "You hate me. You hate this world. Yet every time there's blood, you walk toward it instead of running away." "I used to be a nursing student," Sadie said, keeping her chin up, refusing to break eye contact. "It's muscle memory. Nothing more." "Liar," Gabriel said softly. He didn't move away. The air in the cold industrial kitchen suddenly felt thick, charged with the same dangerous electricity that had sparked in the alleyway weeks ago. Sadie could see the faint lines of exhaustion around his eyes. He carried a heavy, violent crown, and it was crushing him. "Come with me," Gabriel commanded, stepping back. "Where?" "My house. You're covered in blood, and I need a drink. It's time we talked about what you've seen." Gabriel's estate was a fortress disguised as a mansion. Tucked away in the affluent hills overlooking the city, it was surrounded by high stone walls and wrought-iron gates. Security cameras tracked their black SUV as it rolled up the long, winding driveway. Sadie sat in the passenger seat, staring blankly out the window. The blood on her blouse had dried, turning stiff and brown. She felt dirty, exhausted, and entirely out of her depth. She was a bartender from the slums. She had no business sitting in a $200,000 car driving up to a mob boss's private compound. The heavy oak doors of the house opened before Gabriel even reached the top step. Two armed guards nodded silently as they passed into the cavernous foyer. "Give her one of my shirts," Gabriel ordered an older housekeeper who appeared from the hallway. "And burn that blouse." 10 minutes later, Sadie stood in a massive, sprawling library. The walls were lined with thousands of books, real leather-bound volumes that smelled of age and dust. A fire crackled in a massive stone hearth, throwing warm, flickering light across the dark wood floors. She was wearing one of Gabriel's black button-down shirts. It swallowed her, the hem falling to mid-thigh, the sleeves rolled up past her elbows. She felt vulnerable, stripped of her armor, wrapped in the scent of his cologne. Gabriel was standing by a crystal decanter, pouring 2 glasses of amber liquid. He had shed his overcoat and suit jacket. His white shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, revealing a glimpse of the jagged scar on his collarbone. He walked over and handed her a glass. His fingers brushed hers. The contact was electric, a sudden spark that made Sadie pull her hand back, a fraction of a second too fast. Gabriel noticed. He always noticed. He took a slow sip of his bourbon, his eyes locked on her over the rim of the glass. "Drink, it'll settle your nerves." Sadie took a gulp. The alcohol burned a fiery path down her throat, warming her frozen chest. She coughed, gripping the glass tightly with both hands. "Tell me what you saw this week," Gabriel said, moving to sit in one of the heavy leather armchairs by the fire. He motioned for her to sit in the other. Sadie perched on the edge of the seat, keeping her back straight. "Leo met with a man I didn't recognize on Tuesday. Suit-cheap shoes smelled like old cigarette smoke. They didn't eat. They just drank water and argued in low voices for 20 minutes. Leo looked nervous. Gabriel's jaw tightened. "Did you catch a name?" "No, but the man had a tattoo on the back of his left hand, a small black anchor." Gabriel went perfectly still. The firelight cast harsh, demonic shadows across his face. He stared into the flames for a long, silent minute. The temperature in the room seemed to plummet. "The anchor," Gabriel said, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "That's the mark of the O'Connor Syndicate, the Irish crew from the South Side. We've been at peace with them for 5 years. Leo is making a side deal," Sadie said softly, connecting the dots. "Leo sold me out," Gabriel corrected. He turned his head, looking at Sadie with a terrifying, hollow emptiness in his eyes. "Leo knew my route that night in the alley. He set up the hit with the O'Connors. He wanted me dead so he could take the chair." Sadie shivered, gripping her glass tighter. She was sitting in the middle of a war room, delivering the intelligence that was going to get a man killed. The realization made her stomach turn. She was complicit now. The blood wasn't just on her blouse anymore. It was on her hands. "What are you going to do?" she asked, her voice trembling. What I have to do, Gabriel replied flatly. He set his glass down on a side table and leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. He looked exhausted. The mask of the untouchable boss slipped just for a fraction of a second, revealing the bone-deep weariness beneath. You shouldn't have saved me, Sadie, he murmured, staring at the floor. Sadie stared at him. The arrogance, the cold control, it was gone. He was just a man trapped in a bloody cage of his own, making surrounded by wolves, waiting for him to bleed. I didn't think about it. Sadie admitted, her voice dropping to a whisper. The silence in the massive room pressed in on them, amplifying every breath. I just saw a man dying, and I was so angry at the world that night. I just wanted to ruin someone's plan. Gabriel looked up. He met her gaze, and for the first time Sadie saw raw, unfiltered emotion in his eyes. It was a dark, dangerous hunger, mixed with something that looked terrifyingly like reverence. You ruined more than a plan, Gabriel said softly. He stood up, closing the distance between their chairs. He stopped right in front of her, towering over her. Sadie's breath hitched. She should have stood up. She should have stepped back. But she was rooted to the spot, entirely captivated by the gravity of the man in front of her. Gabriel reached down and gently took the heavy crystal glass from her shaking hands, setting it next to his own. Then he placed his hands on the armrests of her chair, boxing her in, leaning down until his face was inches from hers. I haven't stopped thinking about that alley, Gabriel whispered, his breath warm against her skin. I was bleeding out. I was ready to die. And then you tasted like rain and cheap gin, and you dragged me back by the throat. Sadie's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, desperate rhythm. She looked at his mouth, remembering the violent, coppery taste of him. I own you because of a debt, Gabriel continued, his voice rough, dropping lower. His grey eyes burned into hers, stripping away every ounce of her cynical armor. I put you in a glass cage because I couldn't trust anyone else. But you're not a pet, Sadie. You're a weapon. And you just gave me the name of the man who tried to kill me. He reached up his fingers, sliding into her hair, gripping the back of her neck with the exact same bruising intensity he had used in the alley. Sadie gasped, her eyes fluttering shut as a jolt of heat shot straight down her spine. The debt is paid, Gabriel murmured against her lips. You can walk away tomorrow. You can take your brother and disappear. He was giving her an out. The door to the cage was swinging open, but as Gabriel's mouth brushed against hers, a punishing, desperate touch that tasted of bourbon and ruin, Sadie grabbed the lapels of his shirt, pulling him down, kissing the devil back. She knew, with absolute, terrifying certainty, that she wasn't going anywhere. The kiss wasn't gentle. It was a collision of sharp, teeth-bruised lips and the bitter burn of bourbon. Sadie didn't close her eyes to romanticize it. She kept them open for a split second, watching the heavy, dark obsession in Gabriel's expression before the sheer force of his grip pulled her entirely against him. His hands were rough, calloused from years of violence, sliding down her back to drag her hips flush against his. She felt the heavy cold steel of the pistol holstered at his waist, pressing into her stomach. A stark physical reminder of exactly who she was touching. She didn't care. The exhaustion and the fear of the last 3 weeks finally snapped, transmuting into a desperate, furious heat. She tangled her hands in his hair, pulling him closer, kissing him with all the cynical, built-up rage she possessed. Gabriel broke the kiss with a ragged gasp. He pressed his forehead against hers, his chest heaving. The firelight threw jagged shadows across his cheekbones. If you stay, he warned, his voice a gravelly scrape in the quiet library. You don't get to leave when the blood starts pooling. You don't get to look away. I've never looked away, Sadie whispered, her hands gripping his shirt. That's how I found you in the first place. Gabriel's jaw locked. He didn't say another word. He scooped her up his uninjured arm, hooking beneath her knees, and carried her out of the library. The morning arrived with the color of a bruised plum. Heavy grey clouds hung low over the city, threatening rain that refused to fall. Sadie woke up in a bed the size of a small island. The sheets were dark grey silk, absorbing the weak morning light. She was alone. The heavy scent of bergamot and sweat clung to the pillows, but the indentation beside her was already cold. She sat up, pulling the sheet around her chest. The reality of the night before hit her like a physical blow. She had slept with the head of the syndicate. She had crossed the invisible razor-thin line separating civilian collateral from a willing participant. A heavy oak door opened. Gabriel walked in. He was already dressed for war. A black suit, a black tie, and a tactical vest strapped tight over his dress shirt. He looked entirely different from the man who had pulled her into his bed hours ago. His face was a mask of carved stone. The untouchable boss had returned. "Leo is dead," Gabriel stated. He didn't walk toward the bed. He stood near the door, adjusting the cuff of his shirt. "I found him at the docks 2 hours ago. The O'Connors got to him first. They silenced him before I could extract the rest of their network." Sadie felt the blood drain from her face. "They killed their own inside man. Leo was a liability the second he failed to kill me in that alley. They were just waiting for him to be useful one last time." Gabriel looked at her, his icy grey eyes stripping away her morning haze. "They knew I was at the Silver Spoon last night. They know you patched up Victor's man. They know I brought you here." "How?" Sadie asked, the panic finally starting to claw up her throat. "Because my operation is bleeding," Gabriel said flatly. "And right now you are the easiest target they have to get to me. You don't leave this estate today. My men have the perimeter locked down. You stay away from the windows." He turned to leave. "Wait." Sadie scrambled out of bed, ignoring the cold floor against her bare feet. She grabbed one of his discarded shirts from the chair and pulled it on. "What about Dean? If they know about me, they know about my brother." Gabriel paused, his hand on the brass doorknob. "I sent 2 men to your brother's apartment an hour ago to bring him here, and the apartment was empty. The door was kicked in." Gabriel's voice held no sympathy, only absolute cold calculation. "I'm sorry, Sadie, but he's gone." The silence in the bedroom became deafening. Sadie stared at Gabriel, the words refusing to process in her brain. "Empty. Kicked in." "No," Sadie breathed, backing up until her calves hit the edge of the mattress. "No, Dean is a survivor. He hides. He owes money to half the city. He has bolt holes. The O'Connors aren't loan sharks." Gabriel cut her off, his tone sharp. "They are professionals. If they want him, they have him. I am mobilizing my captains. We are going to war today. Stay here." He opened the door and stepped out, the heavy lock clicking solidly into place behind him. Sadie was trapped in the glass cage again. Only this time the walls were reinforced steel, and her brother was the one bleeding on the outside. She paced the bedroom, her mind racing, tearing through the panic to find a shred of logic. Dean wasn't a criminal mastermind, but he was a rat. And rats knew how to scurry. If the O'Connors kicked his door in, Dean wouldn't have fought. He would have run. He had a secondary stash spot, a place he bragged about when he was drunk, a rusted-out shipping container down in the old rail yards. She ran to the nightstand, grabbing her phone. She dialed his number. It went straight to voicemail. She couldn't sit here. She couldn't wait for Gabriel to return with a body bag. Sadie walked to the window. The perimeter was heavily guarded. Men in dark jackets stood by the iron gates, assault rifles slung casually over their shoulders. But the garage was attached to the west wing. She threw on the clothes from the night before, jeans and a fresh sweater. A maid had left, folded on a chair. She quietly opened the bedroom door. The hallway was empty. The guards were focused entirely on the outside. It took her 10 minutes to slip through the cavernous house, moving like a ghost through the service corridors. She reached the sprawling underground garage. The scent of motor oil and expensive leather filled the air. There was a young mechanic wiping down the hood of a dark grey sedan. Sadie didn't hesitate. She walked right up to him. Gabriel needs this car at the old rail yard on 4th Street. She lied her voice, projecting a cold authority she didn't feel. She mirrored Gabriel's flat deadpan delivery. Right now, the mechanic blinked, looking at her. He knew who she was. The entire compound knew she had spent the night in the boss's bed. He didn't question her. "Yes, ma'am," he mumbled, tossing the rag aside and sliding into the driver's seat. Sadie got in the passenger side. "Drive, and don't stop for the gate guards. He's in a hurry." The old rail yard was a graveyard of rusted metal and shattered glass. Weeds choked the cracked concrete, and the skeletal remains of train cars sat rotting under the grey sky. The mechanic parked the sedan near the chain-link fence. "I'm supposed to wait here. Keep the engine running," Sadie ordered. She slipped out of the car. The wind coming off the nearby river was biting, carrying the scent of dead fish and industrial waste. She pulled the sweater tight around her chest, keeping her head low as she navigated the labyrinth of shipping containers. Container 404. That was Dean's spot. She found it tucked behind a crumbling brick maintenance shed. The heavy metal doors were slightly ajar. Sadie stopped. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic warning rhythm. The silence was too heavy. No birds. No distant hum of traffic. Just the wind whistling through the rusted steel. She picked up a heavy iron railroad spike from the dirt gripping it, until her knuckles turned white. She approached the gap in the doors and slipped inside. The container was dark, smelling of stale beer and urine. A single battery-powered lantern sat on an overturned milk crate, casting weak, sickly yellow light. Dean was there. He was tied to a folding chair in the center of the container. His face was a bloody, swollen mess. His head slumped forward, chin resting on his chest. "Dean!" Sadie gasped, dropping the spike. She ran forward, falling to her knees in front of him. She grabbed his face. "Dean, look at me! Wake up!" Dean groaned, his one good eye fluttering open. He looked at her confusion, bleeding into sheer terror. "Sadie, no! No, get out!" "How touching." The voice came from the shadows near the back of the container. Sadie froze. She slowly stood up, turning around. A man stepped into the yellow light. He was tall, wearing a cheap suit and scuffed shoes. He smelled strongly of stale cigarette smoke. On the back of his left hand, etched in faded black ink, was a small anchor. He was the man from the Silver Spoon, the O'Connor liaison. He held a suppressed pistol in his right hand. "I have to admit..." The man smiled, revealing stained teeth. "I didn't think the bait would work." Rossi locked his fortress down tight. "But you just walked right out the front door. You really are a bleeding heart, aren't you?" "Let him go," Sadie said, her voice eerily calm. The panic had burned away, leaving nothing but a cold, hard clarity. "You don't want him. You want Gabriel." "I want leverage," the man corrected, stepping closer. "Rossi is currently slaughtering half my crew on the south side. But if I call him and tell him I have his new favorite pet sitting in a rusted box with a bullet in her brain, I think he might negotiate." He raised the gun, pointing it squarely at Sadie's chest. Sadie didn't close her eyes. She looked at the man, measuring the distance. 10 feet. Too far to lunge. "You're a dead man," she stated simply. "Gabriel doesn't negotiate." "We'll see." The man's finger tightened on the trigger. Crack. The sound wasn't a suppressed hiss. It was the deafening, bone-rattling roar of a high-caliber gunshot. The man with the anchor tattoo jerked violently. A red mist sprayed into the yellow lantern light. He dropped the pistol, his hands flying to his throat, blood pouring through his fingers. He collapsed onto the dirt floor, choking his legs, kicking uselessly. Sadie spun around. Gabriel stood in the doorway of the shipping container. He held a massive silver handgun smoke, curling lazily from the barrel. His tactical vest was smeared with grease, his black suit covered in rain and dirt. He looked like the Grim Reaper dragged straight out of hell. Behind him, the mechanic who had driven Sadie stood trembling, holding a shotgun. Gabriel didn't look at the dying man on the floor, his eyes burning with a terrifying, absolute fury locked onto Sadie. He holstered the gun, walked across the container, and grabbed her by the upper arms. His grip was bruising, desperate. He hauled her against his chest, burying his face in her neck, breathing in the scent of her like oxygen. "I told you!" Gabriel ground out his voice, shaking with a rage so profound it vibrated against her ribs. "I told you to stay in the cage." "I had to get my brother," Sadie whispered, wrapping her arms around his waist, the tension finally shattering. Her knees gave out. Gabriel caught her full weight, holding her up, refusing to let her fall. He pulled back slightly, his eyes searching her face for any sign of injury. Finding none, the mask of the boss slammed back into place. He looked down at Dean, who was weeping silently in the chair. Gabriel pulled a switchblade from his pocket and sliced the ropes binding Dean's wrists. "Get up!" Gabriel ordered, his voice devoid of mercy. Dean stumbled forward, crashing to his knees. Thank you, Mr. Rossi." "Shut up!" Gabriel snapped. He looked at the mechanic. "Put him in the trunk. Drive him to the clinic on 8th Street. Tell the doc to patch him up." The mechanic dragged Dean out of the container. Gabriel turned back to Sadie. The container was silent again, save for the wet, rattling breaths of the dying O'Connor man on the floor. Gabriel walked over to the man. He looked down at him with an expression of complete apathy. He drew his pistol again, aimed at the man's head, and pulled the trigger. The rattling stopped. Sadie didn't flinch. She watched the execution with dead eyes. Gabriel looked at her. He didn't hide the monster. He let her see exactly what he was, what he did to survive. "The war is over," Gabriel said quietly. "The O'Connors are broken. I own the city." He holstered the gun and walked toward her, stopping inches away. "But I don't own you. You disobeyed a direct order. You risked my entire operation to save a junkie brother who would sell you out for a poker chip. He's my blood," Sadie said, lifting her chin, refusing to back down. "I don't leave my blood behind." Gabriel stared at her. Slowly the anger bled out of his posture, replaced by a heavy, profound exhaustion. He reached up his rough thumb, tracing the line of her cheek. "You're going to get me killed one day, Sadie," he murmured. "Probably," she agreed, her voice flat, but a small, cynical smile touched her lips. "But until then, I'm the only one who knows how to stitch you back together." Gabriel let out a low, rough laugh. He grabbed the back of her neck, pulling her in for a hard, grounding kiss. It tasted of gunpowder rain and survival. A year later, the silver spoon was louder than usual. The clinking of crystal glasses and the low hum of expensive negotiations filled the ambiently lit dining room. Sadie didn't stand by the hostess stand anymore. She sat at the head of the long mahogany table in VIP Room A. She wore a tailored crimson suit that fit like armor, a diamond tennis bracelet glittering on her wrist, a gift she had initially thrown at Gabriel's head before begrudgingly keeping. She was looking at a ledger. Opposite her sat Victor. The enforcer's flattened nose had a new kink in it, and the scar on his forearm, the one she had bandaged in the kitchen, was a thick white rope of tissue. "The dock shipments are down 12%. "Victor." Sadie said, her voice cool and level. She didn't yell. She didn't need to. "And the union bosses are complaining about late payments. Care to explain why our margins are shrinking?" Victor shifted uncomfortably in his chair. The massive enforcer, who used to look at her like a piece of furniture now, wouldn't hold her gaze for more than 3 seconds. "It's a logistics issue, Miss Sadie," Victor mumbled, wiping sweat from his brow. "The new Port Authority inspector is pushing back. I need time to persuade him." "You have 48 hours, Sadie replied, closing the ledger with a sharp snap. "Or I'll find someone who knows how to manage a schedule. Dismissed." Victor nodded quickly, pushing his chair back and practically fleeing the room. Sadie leaned back in her chair, letting out a long, exhausted sigh. She pinched the bridge of her nose. Running the legitimate fronts of a criminal empire was just as draining as pouring cheap gin for drunks, only the stakes were measured in body bags instead of bounced tabs. The heavy oak door opened. Gabriel walked in. He looked exactly the same as the night she met him, only the exhaustion that used to line his eyes had faded, replaced by a sharp, predatory contentment. He locked the door behind him and walked over to her chair. "You're terrifying, Victor." Gabriel noted an amused smirk playing on his lips. He leaned against the edge of the mahogany table, crossing his arms. Victor is skimming off the top to pay for his mistress's condo, Sadie said dryly, not looking up as she poured herself a glass of water. He thinks I don't know. Let him sweat for 2 days before you send someone to break his fingers. Gabriel chuckled a dark, low sound that still sent a shiver down her spine. Remind me never to lie to you. You couldn't get away with it anyway. She shot back, finally looking up at him. He reached out his hand, sliding behind her neck, his thumb resting gently over her pulse point. It was a possessive, anchoring gesture. Dean was living in Florida now, heavily supervised by 2 of Gabriel's men, managing a small, legitimate bait shop. He was sober, mostly because he knew Gabriel would bury him in a swamp if he wasn't. Sadie's mother's debts were paid. The mouldy apartment was a distant memory. But the peace was an illusion. It always was in this world. Sadie looked at Gabriel. She saw the scars hidden beneath the expensive suit. She knew the blood that stained his hands, and by proxy her own. She had kissed a stranger in an alley to save his life, completely unaware that she was signing her own soul away in the process. She wasn't a victim. She wasn't a captive in a glass cage anymore. She held the keys. We have a meeting with the Russian delegates at midnight, Gabriel murmured, leaning down, his breath warm against her ear. You coming? Sadie stood up, smoothing the front of her crimson suit. She picked up the ledger. Try and stop me, she said. They walked out of the VIP room together, the boss and his architect, stepping back into the shadows of a city they owned entirely. You don't kiss a bleeding man in an alley unless you have a death wish. Or Sadie realized, unless you were always meant to rule hell beside him. And that is the full story of Sadie and Gabriel, from a desperate kiss in a dark alley to ruling the city's criminal underworld side by side. Sometimes, saving a life means entirely rewriting your own. What did you guys think of Sadie's transformation? Did she make the right call stepping into the syndicate, or should she have taken the money and run? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. If you enjoyed this gritty mafia romance, please smash that like button, share it with your friends, and hit subscribe so you never miss another dark and thrilling story. See you in the next video.